Hey everybody, it's Bridget Murphy with Koru K9 Dog Training, back again with Ray, Shane, and Damian. And today, I'm sorry to tell you, it's not your dog, it's you. So we're going to talk about 10 of the top bullet points that we see that dog owners are commonly doing unknowingly, and how we can help you kind of get through these things. So the very first thing that we wanted to dive in on is one of the most common things that we're seeing, especially now. We want you to slow down and actually teach the dog. And what we see out there, quite frankly, is there are a lot of dog training companies that will put out shorter duration programs, like a 2-week program, because who wants to be gone from their dog for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks? It sounds great. Like, I'm just going to send my dog away for 2 weeks and he's going to come back with 100% off leash obedience and all of these things. I would love to, either Shane or Damian, let's kick it off and talk about why it's important to slow down and truly teach the dog so we can really get the optimal results and long-term success. So I'll let one of you two take it over. Damian, you want to, you look like you're ready to go.
Yeah, well, it's a really important topic, right? So I think a lot of times when you have those shorter programs, they're going to basically focus on getting your dog to not do certain things, right? They're going to punish the dog for doing things that you don't want them to do. I think it's more important to teach your dog what they should be doing, tell them what they should be doing, and then hold them accountable to that, which takes a lot longer, right? When you only have 2 weeks and you're taking a dog and you're going to teach all this obedience, the dog's going to be on tools. It's going to have these guarantees. The only way that those people are going to do that consistently are by just kind of punishing that dog hard, right? And saying, hey, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. And your dog is going to not want to do the things you want them to do, but they're going to have to do them. Ideally, we want our dogs to want to do the things for us, right? To be excited about doing the behaviors we want. It's, when you're using certain tools, there's a way to use them that every dog is going to understand right away. And it's not a pleasant way, right? Because you're just telling them, you use the e-collar a certain way, every dog knows what that means. So you're just shutting down behaviors and you're creating a dog that just kind of has to do what you want them to do. For me, I want to teach the dog what we want from them and then hold them accountable to that command. So I think that's the big difference. There's a lot of trainers out there who can get your dog to do what you want them to do, but they're not going to be happy about it, right? And they're just going to have to do it. And there's no way in 2 weeks that you're going to be able to create a relationship, which is the big part of the training that you need, so that the dog wants to do those things. So for me, the extra time, that quantity of time, pays off in quality of time later on. So I want to be fair to the dogs. I want to create a communication system so I can tell the dog what to do and then hold them accountable, versus just saying, okay, here we go. Every time you do something wrong, you're going to get punished for it. So it looks good. You're totally right. It looks good, 2 weeks, but there's no way that your dog is going to be conditioned to tools, really truly conditioned to understand what they mean, right? You cannot build those behaviors with the tools in that amount of time, and proof them and make them 100%, or make them extremely reliable without just punishing the dog a lot. So I think, it looks good. It looks nice, but there's very few things in the world that we can do in 2 weeks and do it appropriately and do it right. So that's a big one for me, is that the quantity of time pays off in quality of time, and getting our dogs to want to do the behaviors, versus just have to. So I think people really need to be aware of that and question, those things when it sounds so good, that it's probably too good to be true. So that's really the main thing about having a little bit more time, is that we can build those relationships and we can create a communication system. I use the tools to teach the dog behaviors, not prevent other behaviors. And it takes time. So yeah, I would be wary of anything that sounds too good.
Yeah, agreed. And there's a reason that e-collars get a bad reputation when they're used in a way that just punishes and forces a dog into compliance, versus using it as a teaching tool at a low level, that will help establish clarity, communication, consistency, that sort of thing. Shane, have you worked with any dogs that have gone through these 2-week programs or shorter duration programs?
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I definitely have. As a trainer, I want the dog to be confident. And, the majority of these dogs that we work with have behavioral problems, which takes time, and I think that's the big thing, is we can push obedience and try to create this communication in a very short amount of time, but we're going to also create a lot of other issues. And us as trainers, especially in the competing world, we've probably been through that with our own personal dogs and learned from these situations of like, hey, I want to compete really fast, so I want to put a lot of pressure on these dogs and my own dog. But in the long run, we can put a lot of pressure on these dogs real fast, but we're creating problems. And in the long run, we're creating anxieties. You can create fear. You can create a lot of behaviors that we don't want. And in the long run, it's going to take twice as long because you're untraining those behaviors as time goes on, or sending them to another trainer to untrain those behaviors, because now I have an anxious dog that could have some fear-based problems because they were getting lit up by an e-collar, or having an e-collar that's misused to try to get them to do these things in such a fast amount of time. And I think that's the reality of this is you're at the mercy of the dog with this training, because you want the dog to understand, but you want to build their confidence up at the same time and make the decisions on their own to do what we're asking, not force them to do what we want them to do. And I think that's the big thing is, I want a program that I can have a dog that comes out confident, that's super understanding, that I can take anywhere and everywhere. And there's very clear communication, and I'm not creating unwanted problems like that fear-based stuff or anxieties towards training. Like Damian said, we want it to be exciting and fun. We want them to want to work for us. So I think there's a lot more things that we can create doing it in such a short time, when if you just, in the big scheme of things, if you really look at it for the duration of your dog's life, you have them hopefully for 8 to 15 years, whatever that may be. But, 4-6 weeks out of that is a very small amount of time to really get your dog on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, I think Damian mentioned it earlier. You mentioned building a relationship with the dog. So if you're taking a dog into a board and train program, let's just say with a pretty severe history of whatever it may be, whether it's reactivity or bite history or anything like that. Talk to me a little bit about how long it could take a dog to fully start to work for you versus being forced to do something. So when they come into a board and train environment, obviously it's not their home environment. So a lot of times it takes a little bit of time for them to settle in. And could you talk a little bit about what that looks like and why that equates to having the need for longer training programs, not shorter?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. So it's even a confident dog that comes in, even a dog that's fairly confident that comes into a board and train, they're in a new environment. They don't know this person, right? We're doing new things. It takes a little bit of time. Now, if you take a dog who actually has issues, isn't confident, hasn't been exposed to things in the world, it can take a long time. And I tell people that, it can take a few days for a very confident dog who doesn't have very many behavioral issues to a couple of weeks. Sometimes that the end of the second week, beginning of the third week is when we start to see the most change, because I don't want to take this dog who's completely shut down and then pressure them into doing things because we're running out of time. And there's no doubt in my mind that if you're doing something like this in 2 weeks, you're not waiting. You have to get on it right away. And that's just going to create more and more problems. It's that third and fourth and fifth week that the magic happens, right? That you get the most out of it. So the idea, I don't know how many dogs I've had that I don't even really ask much of other than the structure for the first week that they're here. If I can, if you got a dog who's a little rock star, sure, I'll start doing stuff much sooner than that. But for the most part, 3 to 10 days is a pretty good idea of before you start to really communicate effectively with that dog. And if I only had 2 weeks, I would have to push that, right? Which is going to create problems. And dogs will, again, teaching a dog a behavior is the easier part, right? But we want to create a relationship where that dog wants to do those things. That's the hard part. That's the part that takes time. So most trainers can get that dog to do what you want them to do within that amount of time, but they're going to be miserable doing it. They're not going to have a good relationship. They're not going to be confident. Like Shane said, that's a big one, right? They're not going to be confident about it. They're just going to have to do it. So it's that time that I spend implementing the structure, which most dogs don't have, and they have to get used to. That alone takes time, right? The dog's not choosing what it wants to do in those times. I'm structuring its day so that I'm always telling the dog what to do. That's new, and they have to get used to that. And now I have to condition tools. I have to condition a new relationship, the no free lunch policy, all that stuff. The idea that you can do that in 2 weeks and do it appropriately and fairly is not possible in my experience. So I think, again, having that extra time to build a relationship and get the dog confident is super important. And nothing worth doing can happen overnight. So I think it's really important for us as trainers to explain that to people, like, hey, here's what's happening and why it takes a little bit extra time. And I think the proof is in the pudding. When you see dogs that come who have these issues, right? Behavioral issues, fear, anxiety, aggression, all that stuff. And when you see that change over an extended period of time, 3, 4, 5 weeks, it's worth it, right? You can see that. And I've also had dogs that have come from other companies that are e-collar conditioned, but you pull that e-collar out and they cower, right? Because it's not, that e-collar isn't getting them things, it's preventing things. That e-collar isn't the key to going out and doing the things they want to do. It's the thing that's stopping them from doing things, right? And so to be able to get to a place where you grab the tools and the dogs get excited because they know, oh, we're doing stuff. This is how I interact with the world. This is how I communicate with my person. To get that, you need that extra time. So having that extra few weeks to just get them in a place where they want to learn is really important. I think I heard somebody, you can't learn math while running from a bear. If your dog is in fear, all the time in survival mode, they're not going to be able to properly learn things, right? Because they're just thinking about, how do I get through this? So we have to get to a place where they're not in that mindset of like fight or flight or survival. And it's more of like, I want to do these things.
Yeah. So that's going to be great in my head forever about learning math, running from a bear. and I do think a lot of humans these days, just because of our culture now with these little black mirrors that we're staring into all the time, expect quick fixes. We have apps for everything, but there's absolutely no shortcuts in dog training. And inadvertently, you actually hammered through the most of point 2, which we were bringing up, which was too much freedom, not enough structure. I think you said establishing structure about 50 times, which is true. I mean, this is really what happens. And I think this is the number one thing that I saw with anybody getting a puppy or a new dog in the home. They want to have them just instantly be able to kind of run wherever, do whatever they want while you are off doing your own thing, gaming or cooking, or not even paying attention to what the dog's doing. And usually the dog's teaching themselves what's going on. But you guys have any other points to add to too much freedom and not enough structure? Either of you? Shane?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing when dogs come in too, is exactly what you said. Like, we come in with a dog that doesn't have any structure. So we get the dogs that, come in, they just free roam the house. They have a lot of maybe potty training issues, behavioral issues, whatever that may be. A big part of training too is, the why time is of the essence is because, we have to train them a little bit of structure with crate training and, pet cots and the whole training aspect of this. So I think that is a big part of it. And then, touching on what Damian says with fight or flight, I just think, when we're working with dogs, a lot of them already are coming in, especially with behavioral problems that are in fight or flight. I have dogs that are just fearful and they come in and they're so scared that, a big part of all of this time is being able to work through that behavior without even utilizing collars, with getting them out and just associating them to a new place. Because I think a lot of people don't understand that when dogs do have behavioral problems, you put them in a new place. Even a confident dog, they may be a little bit weary of it. Now you take a fearful dog that's already in fight or flight and you put them in a new place, they're just completely shut down. And we can't do anything until the dog starts coming out of that behavior. So I think that touches on, it made me think of that as far as, dogs. Like, I have a dog right now that, we're going on almost a week and it's still aggressive, and I'm going in with a full bite suit because it's still in fight or flight. And I am at the mercy of the dog and when it's ready to come out. I can't force aggression. They have to be ready to change, and I can only guide them, but I can't force them to do anything. And until that dog is ready and has learned, I can't start the process of reprogramming that dog. So it's a matter of time.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And I would think people would want to move at the speed of their dog. So I think what's important to note is if we force a dog to do something before they're ready to do it, that behavior will not be reliable long term. Maybe we could force them into, and let's just use sit for an example, because it's an easy one. Like we could force them into a sit, but if we're creating conflict around that behavior with a tool or force compulsion, whatever we're doing, that behavior will not be reliable long term. Now, when you translate that into a more complex behavior like aggression, anxiety, fear, you're just adding conflict to that variable. So yeah, we want to slow down. We want to give them the freedom, or not too much freedom. We want them to live in structure so that they understand clear expectations. But Shane, you were actually really a really good segue into the next thing that I wanted to talk about is not living in the past. This is tough because as humans, obviously, that's how our brains work. We know what our dogs have been through. Some of them have been through some not great experiences prior to being rescued, or whatever the case may be. But by doing so, Damian, I'd love to flip this over to you. When owners live in the past with their dogs, what do you think that does to a dog's potential for the future?
Yeah, you see this all the time. That the idea is that they think, okay, the dog's had a rough start, and so now they don't want the dog to ever have a bad emotion or to feel any kind of stress or pressure. But all that does is weaken the dog. The life is stress and pressure. So when I use the word pressure, when I'm talking about dogs, there's many types, right? Pressure, life is pressure. So we can talk about tool pressure and leash pressure and body pressure, but there's also environmental pressure, social pressure, all that stuff, right? And a dog who is sheltered too much is protected in a way, or not even protected, but shielded from stress and pressure, and never gets to work through that. When it does hit, which it will eventually, no matter how hard you try to shield the dog from any kind of like pressure or stress, when it does hit, they don't know how to handle it. Right. The idea being like, if you went to school, if you were in college and you did terrible on a test, and your professor's like, oh, you tried really hard, thinking in their head, and I'm going to give them an A anyways. Well, that looks good. But then when you get out in the real world and you realize you don't know how to, you don't really know anything, and you can't handle any kind of criticism or pressure, you're going to fail. So it's our job to build the dog up. The dog has to be able to handle that stuff. The dog is over it, almost guaranteed. When somebody rescues a dog, or a dog has a bad start, and they go into a new home, and that home is loving and caring, the dog will get over it quick if we allow them to, right? The humans are the ones that hold on to it. The dog's not sitting there just dwelling on its past. It's us who are dwelling on that past, and we're creating problems for it. So you're doing your dog a disservice thinking, I can't, he can't handle this stuff. He can, or they can. We just have to appropriately pressure them so that they can learn, hey, I can handle this. I can turn off the pressure. I can be confident. I can handle this stuff. So I think it's really important that you're definitely harming your dog when you say, oh, I never want this dog to ever feel pressure, never be stressed. It's like, that's impossible. It's going to happen. And so let's make them be able to handle it. Let's get to a place where the dog can handle that stress and pressure. Instead of shutting it off in the way they think, because dogs are terrible decision makers on their own. If we just leave it up to them, they're going to make bad decisions until they learn how to make the right decisions. So they're going to learn to shut off that pressure by running, fighting, right? Shutting down, learned helplessness, that type of stuff, where the dog's like, okay, if I just shut down, everything goes away. It's like, that's no way to live, right? The dog's going to have chronic anxiety. It's going to have, it's never going to build confidence. It's never going to get stronger mentally. And that's not fair. So I see a ton of that. And one way that happens too, and this kind of connects a little bit to the structure we were talking about before, is like the dog has it has no value in us as leaders, right? It's getting everything. It has all this freedom. It's doing whatever it wants. It's learning. It doesn't really need us. And then if you have that coupled with the fact that you're not teaching the dog how to handle the pressure, you have a bad situation where when something happens, the dog melts down, and that's where you get really that's when the dog makes a bad mistake, right? Like a fear bite happens or it runs away. So if anything, you're causing more problems by not letting go of that past and moving forward. I tell people all the time, look, the dog's over it. You love this dog. He's got a wonderful life. You're not going to let anything bad happen to him. So let's go ahead and build the dog up. So it's really important to not hold on to trauma. And a lot of times too, that's not what, this dog didn't have that bad of a start. Sometimes they did, sure. But oftentimes, especially if you're rescuing dogs, sometimes there's a story that goes along with it. That's not, it's not really the case, right? Because it's nice for people to feel like they've saved this dog. So, sometimes you create a problem that was never even there. The dog didn't have this bad start, and now you're treating it like it did. And the dog is weaker because of it.
Yeah, Shane, have you dealt a lot with learned helplessness cases? And if so, maybe let's talk to clients a little bit more about what that is and how, them holding on to the past feeds into that. And if not, just your thoughts on
Yeah,
the past.
I definitely have. I mean, the majority of the people, I talk to, it's always a tragic story of rescuing their dog. But then at the very end, they ultimately don't actually know what happens to their dog. So right there, their mindset is setting their dog up essentially for failure, because they're already creating essentially a problem, and I think that's the hard part is, we don't want to coddle our dogs. We want to be very clear with our dogs. And I think that's the big thing. I do have that, with the clients though. They come in with their stories, and now it's already a mindset of, I want to baby you. I want to treat you like a child. And, we call that being anthropomorphic. We put our humanly emotions into our animals, and it can cause a lot of behavioral problems. And it takes away your leadership roles when it comes to owning your dogs, because, unfortunately, a lot of the problems are created by us, as humans. And, once we have the mindset of like, I never want you to feel these things like anxiety and be fearful and all these things, we start creating those things because, the dogs are creatures of habit. And if we put them in an environment that is, like a free for all, if you put a kid in a room with no rules, they can do whatever they want, they're going to make bad decisions, and we're going to start creating problems. So it's the same thing with our animals. We got to have a strong leadership role. We have to almost, guide them into the right decisions, and we have to, let go of the past and start guiding the dogs in the right direction, essentially. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't move forward if you don't let go of the past, right? So
Mhm.
the other thing that usually goes hand in hand with all of this is consistency. And this is kind of an underlying tone in all of what we're saying. And this is so common, especially in households with like a husband and wife or partners or whatever the case is. So I always default to going to Damian just because of the way that my computer's set up. So I'm going to throw this to you, Shane, just to mix it up. Let's talk about lack of consistency and what we can see that turn into behaviorally with dogs.
Yeah, I think consistency is super important with our animals. They are creatures of habit, and that's a big part of it. So, people always talk about obedience, and they always talk about wanting a reliable dog, and they always talk about, what are the other things that I see going home of like the wants, like I want my dog to do these things, and I want to be able to do this with my dog. Well, that essentially does take consistency. Whether I want to teach my dog to sit and stay in a sit for as long as I want, or a down, or have a recall with distraction, we need consistency with training. Structure needs consistency. If I want a dog that is, like I have a high drive dog and I want them to, um, calm and relax, I got to have some sort of consistency with all of that. So I think, consistency in the household is come up with a routine, and this is what I do with my clients is, I am a trainer that, you know, I want to set realistic expectations for my clients. I don't want to give them more of like a working dog background of, hey, do these things. I know they may be unrealistic for you, but I want you to do these things. I'm more of the trainer that let's break this down and figure out what you can do longevity to get to these goals. And I think that's a big part of it is, you know, figuring out a routine that works best for you that you can do long term that then will build the dog up and get you to those goals that you're looking for. But I mean, consistency is everything when it comes to training and bringing your dog back home and getting to the goals that you want and or the behavioral problems that you're having. So I think it's super important.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes means always, right?
Yep.
Yeah, you know, it's you allow them to do it once, they're gonna do it again and again, and whether that's good or bad. But Damian, what do you see with your clients with consistency, and how much do you think this factors into behavior issues?
So you took the words right out of my mouth. I was writing a note there. Sometimes doesn't mean always to a dog, right? And it's actually unfair to the dog to not be consistent, right? Because they're going to be like, well, you let me do this yesterday, or, you know, the dogs don't, you know, they can't look at it in a logical sense, right? So to them, it's like, well, I don't understand why I can't do it now when I could do it yesterday. So it's way more unfair. Some people think being strict, you know, when they hear that word strict doesn't mean mean, right? Strict just means that you stick to whatever plan you have. So being strict, you know, they think, well, that's harder on the dog. It's like, no, letting that dog go back and forth and not understand, not be consistent is actually way more unfair. The dog doesn't understand why it can get away with something sometimes and doesn't other times. Or if it does get all this, like, you know, if it gets a ton of freedom and self-rewarding at some points, and then you try to put structure on it, of course, they're gonna be like, this is terrible, right? Right? Like yesterday I got to run around and do whatever I wanted. So we have to teach them that, you know, that gets them the freedom, or, you know, that they have to earn those things. So the consistency in that is actually the most fair thing for the dog. And if you can't be consistent in a situation, right, you know, you're having guests over, there's a lot of distractions, and you cannot be consistent, put the dog up. That's something I have to tell people all the time. It's impossible to be 100% consistent on everything all day, every day. So there's sometimes where you're like, I'm too distracted, I've got too much going on here and there. So work your dog mentally and physically, and then we can put them up for a little bit. The idea of having your dog crate condition isn't about not having your dog around. It's a way for us to be consistent. So that's really important. And being a leader is hard. It takes effort. It is not an easy task. We have to be proactive. We have to be on top of things. We got to have a plan. So to have that relationship, it isn't an easy thing. So to be consistent, to be consistently a leader, and to have that structure consistent, and to practice obedience, and when you ask for something, you expect something, it takes a lot of time and effort, but it pays off in the end. So it is, I mean, consistency is key. It's more important than being your timing or any of that stuff. All that stuff's important, you know, but you have to be consistent on what you ask from your dog.
Yeah, Damian, have you come across facilities that offer, you know, those stay and train, or they're kind of doggy daycares, but they offer training programs? So basically during your work day, so you've got the dog going away for his doggy training, and he's being treated one way, but then he gets picked up at the end of the day, then he goes home. And what do you think's happening? Right away, you've got that lack of consistency, because there's no way they're going to get that same structure they're getting throughout the day at home, unless that's being translated to the owner. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And that can be, you know, yes, absolutely. You see a ton of that where the dog goes to a training facility, and then they wonder why the dog's not doing the things at home. Well, they're not being taught how to do that. They're not being consistent. The dog, you know, dogs don't generalize behaviors. So when the dog gets home, it's like, yeah, I do things differently here. I see that all the time. And that's very true of in-home lessons as well. So we talk a lot about board and trains, but that goes for in-home lessons too. So, you know, I can tell very quickly when I get to you know, if I'm doing in-homes, whether or not these people are keeping up on the structure, right, that I've really helped them get to. Because the dog, you know, they'll say stuff like, well, the dog's really well behaved when you come, but then when you leave, and it's like, why is that? Because we're consistent when I'm here, right? I show up and the dog's like, oh, we're going to be, you know, we're going to have to do things. And then when I leave, it's clear you're not being consistent. So that goes both ways, whether it's in-home lessons where the dog's with the people all the time, but maybe they're only being consistent when you show up. You can tell that the dog's got, you know, they just put the tools on when you showed up, all of this stuff. or the dog goes for training with someone or during the day, and then comes home. And and I actually see the reverse of that. So you send a dog to doggy daycare with no rules, and maybe the clients are trying really hard at home, but it's difficult because the dog's like, well, I get to leave 5 days a week for 8 hours and be an absolute maniac, and then I come home and you try to put these rules on me. And so it goes both ways, whether it's the lack of structure and consistency in the house or at the doggy daycare or wherever they're going. So you have to plan it. If your dog is going somewhere, you have to talk to them. You have to make sure it's the right facility, it's the right training. It's only unfair to that dog. It's very confusing to that dog. So I see a ton of that.
Yeah, I guess it's really confusing to somebody who doesn't know the why we offer the type of programs we offer, and why some of these other programs that sound great aren't exactly great. Damian touched on it a few, but Shane, I want to ask you, just for the people who are unsure or maybe new to dogs, what does it mean to proof behavior or to generalize behavior, and why is that so important?
Honestly, when it comes to our animals, proofing the behavior, getting them out and understanding it and getting them in the environments to be able to get them to understand it is going to be the most important thing. I take the dogs everywhere. I get them out. I show them environments so I can get them to understand that, hey, this is what I need you to do. I need you to do this here. I need you to do this here. I need you to do this here. So when the dogs do go home, it's a lot easier for them to understand, and it's a lot easier for the parents of the animals to be able to influence and work with the dogs themselves. So, proofing this behavior is super important when it comes to working with these animals. Structure is going to help with that as well, touching on that, but I think it is a big part of it.
Excellent. I guess the one thing people don't realize is just because a dog will do something in one environment doesn't mean it'll translate to another. And I think, this is, especially if you come from a sport environment, you can do these things a million times at a club, then you go out in the trial field and the dog looks at you like he's never done it ever in his life. But this holds true with any behavior you teach a dog. So this is why, I guess, to the untrained eye, people don't understand the value of programs that take their time and go through all these steps, and why it's so important, because there are no shortcuts with the dogs.
Yeah.
That leading into the next point, we've got the lack of advocacy. So again, this might start us. Actually, go ahead. Bridget's got her hand up before I get into the next point. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I wanted to bring up one last thing about consistency, and this will feed into advocacy. So we're talking about how lack of consistency can create behavior issues. One really common thing we see is when somebody gets a puppy or maybe a younger dog, and they allow this puppy to see every dog, human, child, animal, whatever the case may be, when it's on leash. And the puppy's running amok, and it's cute because it's a tiny little puppy, and it's getting socialized on leash. And then this puppy grows up, especially if it's a larger breed dog, and then maybe the humans are a little bit afraid of the big dog, so the owner doesn't want that dog to go approach a human or another dog on leash because it's looking like it's out of control. For your dog, that is confusion. As a puppy, I was able to do this. Now I'm an adult dog. I can't do this. It's really confusing. It's frustrating. And then we see reactivity happen. So this is a really common way that reactivity happens. But on the other end of the leash, or the other person maybe that your dog is reacting at, let's talk about being an advocate for your dog. Damian, I'll flip it over to you, and why advocacy is important, and why it's actually really difficult for some dog owners as well.
Absolutely. So when we're training a dog, we have all these expectations, right? We expect them to do these things. We work really hard. We practice, we proof behaviors, we generalize behaviors. And then, okay, so the dog's doing its part. We got the dog to do its part. Now we have to do our part as, their leaders and their handlers, and that's to advocate for them. A couple things go along with that. Number one, you got to advocate for the dog that's in front of you, right? You may want a certain type of dog. You went and, maybe you rescued a dog, or you got a dog breed, or a certain dog that you expected one thing, but the dog you have in front of you isn't that dog. You have to come to terms with that, because if you don't, you can't advocate for the dog, right? You want this social butterfly, and you didn't get that social butterfly. So you don't want to just pressure that dog into being social. It doesn't mean that the dog can't be in social situations, but this dog's not going to be the dog that wants to go meet other dogs and it's not going to be that dog park dog. It's just not. You have to come to terms with that. That's the first step to advocate for your dog, is to understand what dog you have in front of you and what they need. And then you have to make sure that you are prepared to step in, right? So if you're working on training, the big thing I see is like, if we're working on reactivity or anything like that, and I tell people, hey, when you're out working and training with your dog right now, the worst thing that can happen is have somebody come up and interact with that dog while we're doing that. We're working on neutrality. We're not working on trying to get this dog to interact with people. And you're going to run into someone. You have this cute dog. They want to come up and they want to pet your dog. I'd say most people are pretty respectful. They ask, or they at least approach in a way. And that's when you have to step in and say, hey, sorry, we're training. Or if you are going to interact with my dog, this is exactly how you have to do it, because we're working on certain things. You have to be able to do that. You have to be able to tell people no, right? Like, sorry, you can't pet my dog right now. We're training, or my dog doesn't want to be pet, doesn't want to meet your dog. I use the phrase, oftentimes I work with dogs that aren't friendly. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying this dog's aggressive, but that's what people will hear sometimes. So I'm saying this dog's not friendly. It doesn't want to be friends with you or your dog. And you have to be able to tell people that, right? You have to be able to step up. And I've even had to physically step between me and the dog I'm working, because someone just doesn't want to hear that. Those are extreme cases, and they're less, that's less common, but that's what it means to be an advocate. Hey, I'm going to set you up in the best possible situation. You're going to do your part because I've expected that, and I'm going to do my part. There's a lot of trust, right? So a quick example. So our Rottweiler, Belle, there's off-leash dogs running around, and we had her sit, right? A bunch of huskies come flying at us. It doesn't matter how good obedience your dog has. Your dog, you can practice sit all the time. You can even proof that behavior around a lot of distractions. When you have 3 huskies charging you, a lot of dogs with good obedience are going to break that position. The reason she didn't is she trusted us. We've never let anything happen to her, right? So she held that position because I physically stopped those huskies from getting to her. That's what I mean. There's a trust where she's like, I'm unsure, right? I'm not sure that these dogs are not going to get to me, but man, I trust him. He's never let me down before. So when you have that, that's when you get those behaviors are so strong, because they believe in you, right? The dog's like, I'm nervous, but my person has my back. You have to have that trust, because it doesn't matter how good your obedience is if they don't trust that you're not going to put them in a bad situation. That's how you also can get, environmental confidence, right? I like to push my dogs, my personal dogs, into doing things that maybe are a little environmentally tough, right? Have them place on weird things or get on not stable surfaces. Again, it doesn't matter if they have good obedience if they don't trust that I'm going to put them in a bad situation, or I'm not going to put them in a bad situation. So that's where advocacy comes in, and you have to just know the dog in front of you and be honest with people. You can be friendly and fair, but just tell them, this is how you have to interact with my dog, or no, you can't. It's okay to say that sometimes.
I love that story about Belle, just because I know her and I know she's the best dog in the world. That it was a really cool story to hear that. But I hope what people watching this are hearing, the underlying tone of that too, is that trust wasn't established in just 2 weeks or a day. That took years of work. So we've got time, clear expectations on the dog that's there. One day, and with Belle, she wouldn't have done that. So I hope that people are kind of hearing this underlying message. But Shane, talk to me about any things that you've seen with dog owners and having issues being an advocate, or what difficulties they might see out there.
Yeah, I mean, one, I really think it's just understanding your dog and like taking the time to really understand them. You're gonna see so many cues. You're gonna understand pressure and what's too much for them. When I can push them and expand their training. So I think really understanding your dog is going to be step one for that. And then when it comes to those situational times when you are out and about, working with your dog, set them up for success. If I have a dog that I know is reactive, I don't want to go going right by a dog that is unpredictable, that I don't know what's going to happen, because I'm going to make or break that. Set my dog up for success, start further away, proof them from further away, and then gradually get closer. But it takes time. you know, and I think that's the big thing is this is where all that time is coming in, even us as trainers. I can't just go right to taking an aggressive dog right by another dog. I set them up for failure. And what happens? I create more reactivity. I create more anxiety. I create more problems. And I think that's the big thing to understand here. And, you know, threshold. I really need to know as a dog handler, and I want to, these are all the things I want to teach my clients do is like, where is my dog's threshold in the moment? You know, every day is going to be a little bit different, and hopefully with time and training, my thresholds become closer and closer to my goals. But, you know, just know, you know, I need some sort of comfortability in the animal for them to perform. So, you know, just know these things and understand these things. And at the end of the day, you know, this is what kind of defines kind of how training goes, and understanding our animals.
Yeah, just to follow up the advocacy point, I mean, I guess a lot of this stems from some of this information that's being propagated by some of the larger rescue organizations out there when they're teaching socialization. And there's a lot of confusion around what that is and what it isn't. But the one I can think off the top of my head is when they're telling puppies to go meet every puppy they can, every human they can. And the more, the better. Basically, you're flooding them with external stimulus. So what happens, you've got an externally focused dog who's not looking towards for input from their owner. And this is where you get into problems when they start to mature. And that when it starts, this is when they're not allowed to do that, and or they start doing it to other dogs that aren't all about that, and it becomes a problem. One negative experience can create a whole lot of problems with your dog. And I've told a lot of people this in the beginning, and some heed this advice and some don't, but there truly is no value to having all these puppy friends and to go out of your way to create these situations which could inevitably backfire because you have no control of what that other dog's going to do because you know nothing about it. So I think this is just really important to understand that these large rescue organizations, although well-intentioned, are putting out information that is absolutely incorrect and at times dangerous. So you really have to kind of look into this stuff and get a true understanding of dog behavior and understand where this is coming from, because again, it's just prevalent. You know, these clients already have some of these things fed into their head because, you know, I've always told them, you want to scare yourself or confuse yourself, go on the internet for dog advice. You're going to have all sorts of crazy things that are extreme one way or the other. And this is absolutely the way to do it. And there's always that type of arguments, but it's hard to weed through that when you're the brand new dog owner and you're literally checking off everything that the rescue org told you to do, and it's turning out badly for you. And that's not even considering the breed specifics and everything else that goes along with it. So I think it's just good for people to know where it's coming from and why it's out there and why it's confusing and why you as a trainer are telling them that their dog may not be the best dog to be sitting at Starbucks, you know, with under the table when Fifi walks by. That just might not be the dog you have, unfortunately. So it's good to know that. I just want to make that point so people understand, I guess, where these things came from. They didn't just drop out of the sky. They're actively being promoted by certain organizations, and they're causing all sorts of problems. That being said, I think we need to move in the next point, which is probably the lack of clear communication. I know we've touched on this briefly, but this can come in a lot of forms, whether that's the use of tools, timing, and all those type of things. But when we're talking about in the context of it's not you, it's your dog, or it's not your dog, it's you, what does lack of communication mean to you, Damian, when you're talking about dog training?
So for me, when it comes to like the problems that the handler, the owner are creating, right, is that you're never taught a communication system. You're just using words and you've never created value or created power behind those words, right? So the only reason the word good oftentimes means anything to a dog is because it's often followed by a reward, right? You can mark a behavior with any word if you follow it with either a reinforcement or a punishment. So to me, it's like there's this idea out there that certain words have power to a dog. Even no, it's just I see people all the time telling their dog no, 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 and it means nothing to the dog because it's never been followed by a consequence. We talk about the way we train and balance dog training with operant conditioning, that's learning through consequences, good and bad, right? But if you don't pair something with that, it doesn't mean anything. So I have clients who are saying a lot to their dog. They're talking a lot, but they're not saying anything is a better way of saying that, right? They're using all these words. The dog doesn't mean anything. So that's the big problem. They think that these words have meaning or power, or they're very inconsistent about it, right? So when they say no, there's never any consequences, or very rarely any consequences. So the dog is very confused. There's a lack of communication, and it's on the handler or the owner at that point, because you didn't teach this dog what these words mean. They have to have power behind them. So I think that's a big part of problems owners make with dogs, with clear communication and confusion, right? So if you ask your dog to sit and they only do it 1 out of every 3 times, when you need it, it's not going to be there, which is another big part of the lack of communication. So when I work with my dogs, I talk to them a lot, but I use a very small set of words, right? I use the words that I taught them, that they know. So it's really important to understand how to teach a dog what a word means, and then use it appropriately to make sure that we keep power in both the reward marker, the good and the yeses, and that we keep power in the negative markers, right? The punishment markers. Again, I try not to compare humans to animals, but sometimes there's a good, comparison there. And that's like, how many people, you have kids and they threaten to ground their kids all the time, and their kids just blow them off, right? Because there's no power behind that. They're not reinforcing that with anything. It's the same thing with no and good and all that good stuff. So we have to understand that we have to create a language. The dog's not going to understand it, right? We have to create it. And if you don't take the time to do that, that's on us as owners. It's not on the dog to understand our language. And so same with tools and things like that. If you inconsistently use that tool, which is another huge thing I see, right? Then the dog doesn't understand it. The more you use the tools, the better the dog understands it. If you wait and only use those tools, I know we try to build this like encompassing communication system, but then people will wait until they're frustrated and then they'll put the tool on their dog. And it's like, okay, there's a lack of clear communication. So now the dog just thinks the tools are bad. We're only using them out of frustration, or we're only using it when the dog's being bad or naughty. And so it's very confusing. The dog's like, okay, you're yelling at me in a language. I use the example, if you go to work every day and everybody speaks English and you don't speak German, but every time you got in trouble, your boss yelled at you in German, that'd be really confusing. You'd be like, I know he's mad at me. I know that I did something wrong, but I can't fix it. I have no idea. I'd just be stressed. I'd be on edge all the time. So we have to really make sure the dog understands the language, and that's on us, right? So the thing I see the most with handlers and owners is that they didn't make it clear. They didn't create that clear communication, and without it, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, I think dog owners need to know dogs don't understand language. That's not how their brains work. They learn in pictures and patterns and repetition. And this is why we're preaching the consistency, the communication. And actually, Shane, I'm going to kick this one over to you. Kind of a really good segue. When we create that very clear communication system, we're using the markers of, not everybody uses the same. I use yes, no, good. I think you guys are the same as me. But the power of rewarding dogs' state of mind. Shane, talk to me a little bit about what we see with dog owners and how they may be inadvertently rewarding the incorrect state of mind in their dog. You're on mute.
Got it. For me, the first thing that comes to mind is this happens a lot with behavior. A big part of this is, let's say our dog is fearful. We have a dog that's super scared. So again, we put our humanistic tendencies into our dogs, and what do we do as humans? We start petting them. We start telling them, hey, it's going to be okay. We may even pick them up, start petting them. They're shaking, they're clearly very fearful, and we're basically coddling them. And what's happening is we're encouraging that behavior. So the timing there is basically letting them know that, hey, you should be fearful right now. You should be scared right now, and rewarding that behavior. Another one too, the dog goes to the bathroom and we're not home. We get home, everyone's heard this one, the dog is may look like something's up, but they're more or less reading off of our emotions instead of what we actually think they're reading off of. And, we scold them for something that happened hours ago that they're not associating with. So timing is super important when it comes to influencing our dog's behavior, and a lot of times as owners, we are reinforcing stuff that doesn't exist because in the moment you have a very short amount of time, seconds, to reinforce a dog's behavior for them to associate it with what you're actually asking of them. And so the majority of the time, and a simple thing too when it comes to just obedience, we put our dog on a pet cot and a place command, we may turn around and then we look back and they're halfway to us and we correct them, but now we're correcting them for running to us, which we don't want, not for the actual behavior at hand. So timing is everything when it comes to influencing our dog's behavior, giving them the best understanding. I always tell my clients, again, be very intentional when it comes to your sessions with your dog. I don't care if they're 2 minutes. When you're working that dog for 2 minutes, be very intentional, set the dog up for success. Whether you put that dog into a sit, you're reinforcing it in the moment. But anytime we are interacting with our dog, we're training our dog. So we can either train them in a positive way that pushes their obedience and understanding forward, or we can make it confusing and set it back a little bit by being super inconsistent with our timing. So it is super important to really, one, understand your trainer and listen and try to be intentional. And again, that's why structure is brought to the dog's attention, and that's why we use it, because we can't always be on top of it with them, with our timing, with we might be distracted, whatever it may be. So if we can't be in a position where we're working our dog and we can catch every little thing that they're doing, structure them. And timing is obviously super important when it comes to pushing your dog in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, really good job at segueing this stuff, you guys. It's almost like all of these things feed into each other, huh? Imagine that. One really important thing, and again, this has been an underlying tone that all of you watching have heard: realistic expectations based on your dog. Damian, talk to me a little bit about what you tell your clients about expectations for the dog in front of them, as well as how they can expect those expectations to, I guess, morph over time, if that makes sense, through the process of training.
Absolutely. And just one point I'll make on the rewarding the incorrect state of mind before is that the idea that you get what you pet, right? Love can be unconditional, but praise should not be. So when you praise a dog, you're praising not only what they're doing, but their state of mind. So that's kind of the mantra I keep in my head is I'm not just going to reward by praising or petting or engaging with my dog. I'm not just rewarding what they're doing. I'm rewarding what they're thinking and telling them it's okay to think that way. So if you look at your dog in that context, it's much easier to say, hey, wait, I'm going to make a mistake here and reinforce a behavior that I don't want. So that being said, though, with the expectation, you have to have fair expectations, number one, right? Like, here's the dog, here's where the dog is in his training. And so here's what we can expect from the dog. But having high expectations, reasonable, but high expectations is important. That's what I think the number one thing I see when it comes to expectations is people think that the dog can't do these things, or they're okay with just barely getting by with certain things. So for me, it's be fair with it, but have a higher expectation. Hey, my dog knows how to sit, so they can sit for a longer period of time. They can do these things. So, and if you have low expectations or no expectations of your dog, then that's what you'll get. And if you have high expectations of your dog, and that may change, if you have a really strong dog versus a weaker dog, high expectations for those dogs are different. But either way, if you say, hey, no, here's what my dog can handle, and so I'm going to hold them accountable to those, and I'm going to do my part, then you'll get that dog. Your dog will rise to whatever expectation you have for them, as long as it's a fair expectation. So I have plenty of people who say, oh, my dog can't do this, or, my dog is dumb. You hear that a lot, and it's like, I almost guarantee your dog is not dumb. You can have an expectation that, hey, your dog can do more. And then having the same expectation. That's probably the biggest thing. So you have households, right, who one person has these certain expectations and the other doesn't. Again, we talk about consistency. That's the major issue I see in houses is, mom may expect one thing and dad expect something else, and now the dog is confused, or it just isn't fair. So just listen to your trainer is a big one about what your dog can handle, but also don't be afraid to be like, hey, I'm doing my part, I'm working hard and I'm training hard, so my expectations for my dog can rise, and the more you do with your dog, the more you can expect from them.
I know we're crushing time here, but just one quick point about expectations is when we're dealing with dog breeds and genetics, and getting the right dog. So if you've got yourself a Belgian Malinois that's a working breed, and you want to be a couch potato with this dog, that's not going to turn out well for you. And then vice versa. There's other, we could flip that in other scenarios, but in general, you have to take that into account, that genetics matter, and come up with expectations as far as how are you going to live with this specific dog that you selected to come into your home. The next point I want to get into, we just have two more before we wrap this thing up, is the evaluation of food and rewards. I guess we see a lot of this if people just constantly just give dog treats, or, if you want a dog to work for a specific toy, and just having it laying around all the time. Shane, you've probably seen a lot of this with working breeds and stuff like this, but how does this translate to kind of your average pet owner?
Yeah, I mean, rewards vary, by dog. You get some dogs out there that are super treat motivated and reward based, which could also be a double-edged sword, because some dogs are so driven to a reward that they can't think, and they break positions a lot easier to go towards the reward. So it actually makes things almost harder for them to stay in positions and understand what you're asking for, because they are so driven. And then on the other spectrum, you have dogs that don't like rewards. And again, I think this all falls under timing. How long does that take? Because if I have a dog that is super treat driven, we can train them a little bit quicker. They have a faster understanding. They're willing to do more. If I have a dog that doesn't like, really isn't interested in treats, it's going to take a little bit more time to get them to do what we want them to do as far as positions go. And I think that's all part of training and understanding the dog and what works best for them. So.
Yeah, Damian, what do you see as far with your clients devaluing food or rewards? Any other situations that you see on your end?
Absolutely. So one of the major ones is just devaluing. We could talk about devaluing treats and reward and ball rewards and different things like that, but devaluing their food is the first thing I see. So your dog, almost every puppy, 99% of puppies love their food, right? Even if they're going to end up not being super food motivated, as a puppy, they love it. One time, maybe you gave your dog a lot of treats or something, your dog doesn't finish their food. First thing that owners do oftentimes is, oh my gosh, how do I get this dog to eat, right? So we start adding wet food and toppers and all this stuff. And now when the dog doesn't have that, they're like, yeah, I'm not eating this, right? Like, where's the good stuff? Why am I going to eat my dinner when I get ice cream no matter what? So that's the number one thing, right? Your dog is not going to starve itself. You probably, if the dog didn't finish its food, it's not hungry. And so that's the big one. I love the idea. I've heard it described as like a restaurant style feeding, which means that the restaurant's open and then it's closed, right? That's the simplest thing. Letting your dog free feed or make a decision on when and when. Why does it need us? It's like, oh, I got a buffet at all times. So the value coming from me as the leader when I try to give this dog any kind of food reward doesn't mean anything. It's like, I don't need that. I know I can just walk over to my bowl and get it whenever I want. Or if I hold out, I'll get the good stuff. That's the first mistake they make, right? Having your dog work for its food in the beginning, especially a puppy. Almost every puppy will. Why go to that higher value stuff right away? Make them work for their food. Create value in you as a leader. So that's a big one I see with devaluing. And then, of course, devaluing ourselves, right? And I think Ray touched on this. When this dog just gets to interact with every person in the world, they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. They won't even look at their person. I don't know how many dogs I see they go outside and won't even look at their person. That's also devaluing yourself as the leader, right? Because they're like, whatever, I don't care about what you have to say. I'm going to go get my external rewards. I'm self-rewarding. And I see that all the time. So you want to make sure that you as the leader and as the owner are the most valuable thing in the world. They might like other stuff, but man, when they hear your voice, they're like, that's my person. He's got all the good stuff. And the first step to that is creating value in the food, creating value in the rewards, making sure they don't have free access to all the rewards, that they come from you. Your dog can have as much fun and play as you want them to have, especially early on, but you've got to produce that, because if not, they're like, I don't need you. I'll go pick my toy out of my toy box, 50 different choices. And so when you try to reward me with something, it's like, I don't need that. So make sure that your dog doesn't get its food and its rewards, and yourself as a leader doesn't get devalued because you're concerned about them not eating, or not, the dog's not going to starve itself. You're probably overfeeding them, or you've probably given them too many rewards.
Which is all very well intentioned and kind of leads us to our very last point. Why love isn't enough. Listen, we all love our dogs more than anything. I started a company this because I love my dogs. But I'd actually love to hear from both of you on why love isn't enough to help our dogs. Damian, I'll let you go first.
So love, like I said, you pick up a puppy and it's your puppy, you're going to love that dog. I mean, it's just this natural connection, right? But I explain this in human relationships in a way. What is love without communication and respect in between humans? I would call that a toxic love, right? How many people do we know that love each other, but they have a terrible relationship? They don't communicate effectively. There's no respect, but they love each other so much they can't get away from each other, right? That's a toxic relationship. I see a ton of toxic relationships between people and dogs, right? They love their dog and they're just like feeding into all these problems with their dog, but there's no communication and there's a lack of respect. And when I say a lack of respect, I mean respect as a leader. Like, this person loves me, but they make the decisions. When they say something, I follow because they have all the good things. So when you lack communication and respect and you only have love, you create a toxic relationship. And I see a lot of that between humans and animals. And so that's why love is enough. Love by itself with nothing else can actually be detrimental. So if you really love your dog, you have to do things sometimes that are difficult, because it's best for them and it's best for your relationship. So if all you're thinking is, I'm going to love the problems out of my dog, that's not going to happen. If you can't effectively communicate and there's not a respect there as a leader, then the love is actually going to cause problems. And so you have to get out of the mindset that you can love a dog, love the problems that a dog has out of them, right? And if you really love your dog, if you truly want the best for them, then you can make those hard decisions and say, hey, okay, there's going to be more structure. There's going to be less free time. There's going to be less, free lunches, because that's what's best for my dog.
I got to say, that was really well put. We're rolling up on over an hour, and it was so well done, that last statement, that I think we should just close on that. I really thank everybody for hanging with us. I know this one went a little bit longer than our normal one, but I hope you really listen as a dog owner and hear the underlying tone of how all of this is very holistic in your dog's life. It all feeds into each other. And there's a reason that we at Koru K9 offer the programs that we do. It's to set you up for success by taking the time to establish trust, to build your relationship, to teach your dog what we do want them to do. And all of this is here to help you. So on that note, be sure to look us up at our website, koruk9.com. Click the like and subscribe button below. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, obviously, if you're watching us, TikTok, all of the places at koruk9.com. And we will be back again real soon. Let us know if there's any topics you want to hear as well. Thanks, everybody.